This is a walkthrough of using the dental charting GPT. So a GPT is essentially a customizable version of ChatGPT. So it has a little less of the comprehensive knowledge, but you can give it a specific set of instructions so that you don't need to give it that each time. And so I've given the dental charting GPT instructions that right now just on my restorative procedures, but we can expand this to the other doctors and other procedures. And so I wanted to give you a walkthrough of how to set it up and how to use it. So the first thing in general, if you haven't been using ChatGPT, to know is that essentially each conversation you have with the GPT, it's going to not remember anything from the last conversations. It'll know its knowledge, the prompt that it's been given by me about dentistry and how to make a note, but it's going to forget what you wrote in the last chat if you start a new one. So you'll want to set up a new chat if you're working on a new day of notes, or maybe even after a note, you'll figure out what works. You'll be able to do several notes and not have it get bogged down or have any issues generally. But it's just something in general when you're working with GPTs or in ChatGPT. Although with ChatGPT you can turn on a memory feature which helps it remember certain things from conversation to conversation. So first you're going to want to download the ChatGPT app. You can access it on a web browser, but you're not going to be able to have the voice transcription that's built in through OpenAI or ChatGPT, and that's going to work a little bit better than the transcription on your phone. So download the app, and then you're going to want to set up an account. You don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to have a subscription. Just set up a username and password, or you can just log in with your Apple ID. Once you have it set up, you want to browse to the link for the dental charting GPT that I'll give you, and then you'll tap on dental charting at the top and tap on keep in sidebar. And what that's going to do is allow you to have the dental charting GPT always available in the sidebar, so you don't have to browse to it or find the link the next time. So it's always accessible there. All right, once you have the dental charting GPT pulled up, I set up a quick start guide, which I'd recommend you go through. It'll take a few minutes to read, but it'll give you basically the information that the GPT has. So it'll better allow you to know what you need to use in your instructions or what you can leave out, basically the default. So you want to view the GPT as though it's an assistant, like a person. So this lets you know what it knows and allows you to be more efficient and not have to put all the information in, because you can see how it's thinking. So you can just click on this sample prompt here and it'll show you the quick start guide. And we'll run through this quickly here, but essentially it tells you what it does and then tells you about all these defaults that it has. And so if you don't give it a diagnosis, it's going to assume caries, unless it's a class 5, which it'll assume wear, erosion, or NCCL, non-carious cervical lesion. So I figured those are the most common things that the diagnoses, or you can specify a diagnosis. If you don't, the default anesthetic is going to be 1 carpule of septicane, unless you tell it a different number of carpules or a different anesthetic. It knows that if it's just occlusal, wear restorations, or sealants, it's not going to put any anesthetic in. If it's class 5, it should just put topical only. And it knows all the different anesthetics with both their brand name and their generic name. And it knows that we buffer the anesthetics. For the restorative material, for posterior teeth, it's going to default to Admira Fusion Extra Composite, which is what I use. For class 5 restorations, it'll default to A3 flowable unless you give it another shade or another material, Fuji. And then for the anterior teeth, it's going to expect a shade in transparency like A2B. If you don't give it, it should ask, but it sometimes forgets to do that. And if you give it a shade, it should just use that for the anterior teeth and then use the default or whatever you've given it for the posterior teeth. It'll include a note about occlusion if any of the surfaces are surfaces you have occlusion on. It knows to default to not using desensitizer unless you say so, since I'm typically just using it on deeper restorations. And then for pulp caps, it knows about indirect and direct pulp caps, or if you can just tell it that a restoration is deep, regardless of whether it's a pulp cap or just deep, it'll give some information about that. We warn the patient there may be sensitivity, may need root canal treatment, but it knows about ultra blend and the material there. And then if you don't give a next visit, it's just going to assume it's a recall visit. Otherwise, you can say next visit, crown 30 or bright restos. And so you're basically just able to give it as little as you need so that you can make it pretty efficient, to get notes done. And then it gives some examples here. And often put some information about sending it to the different operatories, but I'll show you how it works. So there's a few different ways to input your information. And one way I found pretty easy is just taking a photo of just the procedures that we did. So you don't want to include any patient information either in the picture or in the note because this isn't HIPAA compliant, but as long as we're not putting any patient identifiers, that's fine. So you just take a photo of the restorations and the diagnoses codes. And so it knows what the diagnoses codes mean and it'll put the proper diagnosis there. So you can either take a photo and import it later, or you could just take a photo right in ChatGPT. Or you can use the voice input to put all the information in or any additional information. So I would use the voice input with the microphone in the text box because that's going to use OpenAI's own transcription service, which is going to be a little better, I find, than the one on your keyboard. So in this case, I'm just going to add the extra information. You can either type it and it knows carps. You don't have to write carpules or lido, septo. It knows those type of shorthand. So here I put that we had 2 carps pretending to be Kia. So I'll put my name because it's going to want the assistant name. And then that we used desensitizer on a couple teeth, that tooth number 19 was deep, and what the next visit was. Since I just put 2 carps, it's going to assume it's still septicane. And then it puts the note together using the information on the photo as well as the other information that I gave it. Then if I were to have any updates, say it did make a mistake or I forgot that we did a pulp cap or something, you can just add something more, say also desensitizer on 18 or whatever you've forgotten, and it'll update the note for you. And then here I'm going to put the computer that I'm working on so that it knows where to send it. So each computer has a different name. So just the op1 through op5, as well as op-A through op-E. And then I've got the front desk computers, front desk 1, front desk 2, front desk 3 in clockwise from like Carlos to Aubrey's direction. And then sterile as well as break room. I believe you can ask it, and I'll put this in the quick start guide, you can ask it what the computer's names are. So basically you're going to be using this to make your note while you're sitting down at one of these computers, and then it'll ask you what operatory you want to send the note to, and then you tell it, and then it's going to take a little bit of time to contact the server and send it there. Once it's sent there, you can switch over to the computer, and each computer has a little script running so that as soon as it detects that a group note window is open, it'll start polling or pinging the server and asking if it has any notes for that specific computer name. And then once it detects that there is one, you'll have this pop up, and you can either paste it, which is usually what you want to do, And then if you have any final edits, you can do it there. Or if for some reason you're on the wrong chart, you can just hit snooze and then it won't prompt you again until you are on the correct group note, or you can just click delete if you want to delete it from the server without pasting it. So if you paste, when you paste it, it's going to delete it as well. So that's basically how to use it. You'll have to play around with different ways of using it, whether you're taking the photo, whether you're voice inputting or writing it in there, and try to experiment with how little information you can give it, because it should allow for pretty efficient charting with just giving it the bare minimums. One thing that I just recently added that I think would be helpful is I gave it some instructions so that if you continue doing new notes without sending it to a computer, it's just going to remember each note and give it an ID number, so that you could, in between appointments, say you've cleaned up an appointment, you don't want to forget the shade and how many carpules, the shade, how many carpules we used. You can maybe just take a quick photo of the procedures, type in the carpules and the shade, and then create a note, and then put your phone away and move on to the next appointment. Or this might even work better if the doctor is heading out of the room to do an exam, but you're pretty much done with everything. So the note is finished at that point, or all the information for the note is finished at that point. So you can just quick do the note there, and then you don't need to sit down at a computer and send it, as well as tell it your assistant name, until later on in the day. It's just going to accumulate these notes. So I did this as an example there. So I did one note by voice, and it created the note for us. And then I said, you want to specify new note, and then give the new note, because otherwise it sometimes thinks you're just updating the last note. And you do want to read through this, because sometimes it can mess up. So I've got the two notes there, and I try to make it so it would say, oh, okay, I'm making that note number 1, but it doesn't look like that's working. And so I asked it just to check whether it has those notes there. And you can also just put list notes, and it'll give you all the notes and the numbers. So it did, in fact, remember all the notes 1 and note 2. And then when I'm finally sitting down and ready to send some notes, I'll tell it who I am, what assistant I am, and what operatory I'm in. And then I can just say send note number 1. And it's going to send that. But interestingly enough here, it says there's an issue sending it to Op3. And this surprised me, but I thought I understood what it was. What was going on is that it looks like it sent to Op3 without a space in between, but I wasn't sure. But the thing with LLMs or AI now is that often you can just tell it what's going on, or ask it to problem solve itself, which is what I did here, and it'll figure it out. So it makes some simple mistakes at times. So I just said, try to figure out the error and redo it, and it thought about it and it says, it looks like the operatory ID might be a little bit different, and start again, and it worked. So then I just asked it to send note 2, and then it sent note 2. And so I would send note 1, and then I would open up note 1, whoever that patient was, paste it in there, and then that's going to be deleted from the server. And then I'd send note 2 and have the group note for the second patient open up. And then I could go through the whole day's worth of notes, the whole morning's worth of notes in this way. So you want to play around and see what works for you, what's most efficient, and give me feedback as well if you find you're having certain errors, or if you think of an idea that we could implement to make it better. Let me know and we can do that. And then as OpenAI improves their models too, you'll probably notice that it'll be a little smarter and not make some of the mistakes that it can at times. But it seems to be working pretty well. So hopefully that makes everybody's jobs easier. And let me know if you need any help.